Let's take a look at using sample groups in the Cheers registry. To access sample groups, you'll need to make sure you are logged in with a Rater account. Only Rater accounts have access to the sample groups section of the registry. After logging in with your account name and password, select the community you wish to work in, either by selecting it from the site's filter menu or by using the search bar. Once you are in the community that you'll be performing the work in, click on the Sample Groups button at the top of the screen. This will bring you to the primary sample group tool. If you're familiar with the Cheers registry, this is where you might notice some changes, since we've updated the types of sample groups that can be created. To select your sample group type, click the drop-down menu and pick your type from the list. For this example, we'll be creating a residential new construction open sample group. Please note that for this demo, we'll be providing a generalized overview for raters using the sample group tool in the registry. The specifics of the other sample group types listed here from the drop-down menu are covered in other Cheers training materials. Selecting your sample group type from the list brings you to the Grouping tool. This is where you can find different sites that are currently eligible for sampling. You can then select them and have the tool perform some checks to ensure that these sites comply with the various rules that exist for that site. When you first arrive at the Grouping tool, the Add to Group button is inactive. This button will become active once you select your site or sites from the list. If you are dealing with a community with a long list of sites, you can use the search bar to type in a filter and find the ones you need. If you want to search in a different community, you can use the secondary search bar to find and switch community views. You can also click Cancel to get out of the Grouping tool. Let's get back to the main list of sites. Select the site you want to work with by clicking on the box next to the name of the site. To work with multiple sites, select as many as you'd like to work with. With open groups, like in this example, you'll be restricted to 5 sites at a time. If you need to be working with multiple sites but aren't sure which ones can be grouped together, you can click the Compatible button. What this does is review the sites to determine if they have the qualifications, such as same measures, installing contractors, or same jurisdiction, in order to be grouped with the initial site you've chosen. The tool then highlights the sites in the group that are compatible. In this example, only the second site is compatible with the first. The sites that are not compatible are indicated in red, and notes are provided as to why the site is not compatible. Once you have selected the sites you'd like to group, you'll see the Add to Group button becomes active. Click Add to Group to assemble these into your sample group. This will create your sample group and bring you to the sample group interface. The 2 sites we've selected are in the group listed at the top of the page. As you can see, we have a maximum of 5 sites that can be added, so if there were additional sites to add to this group, you can simply click the Add button to return to the previous screen and select your additional sites from the list. One of the rules for this particular type of group is that sites can only be added if the earliest date on the installation certificate is no more than 180 days old. Here, we provide the date that the earliest installation certificate was signed by the responsible person and provide the timeline for reference. Sites with installation certificates older than 180 days will not be allowed to be added to the sample group. From the list of sites in the sample group, if you would like to see the site information directly, you can click the quick link arrow beside the listing. This will bring you to the site details page of that site's listing in the registry. While this can be helpful, you should note that there's no direct link back to your sample group listing directly from the site details page. You would need to navigate back to your sample group using the Sample Group button at the top of the screen and find the sample group that you have created to continue. Let's head back into our sample group. If no test data has been entered yet, you can remove the site from the sample group by clicking the X in the site listing. However, once data has been entered, these buttons become inactive, and you will not be able to remove it. This is one of the rules for sample groups. Scrolling down, the bottom section of the page is the area where you'll start entering your test data. The particular dwelling name is listed here. This aligns with the name of the site as it's listed at the top of the page in our list of sites. In this particular example, both of the systems are single HVAC system sites. However, if one or either had more than one HVAC system, as many sites do, the second HVAC system would be listed in this column, and a second set of documents would be listed as being associated with the second HVAC system. Here to the right are where we have the various forms associated with their particular site. One of the things that is allowed in sample groups is that you can perform testing on different sites within the sample group. For example, we could perform the test for the ENV21 on this site, and then do the test for the ENV22 on this site. These will then generate what are called sample documents for the site that is not tested. To complete a document, click on the document from the list and complete and sign the document. This part of the process has been covered in previous Cheers training videos in this series. Once the document is complete, it will now appear in green in your sample group. Please note here that the process for the documents registering the signature may take a bit of time. If you've completed your document, but it is not showing up in green back in your list of documents in the sample group, try refreshing the page in your browser in order to get this view of your completed document. You can also just move directly to the next form. The page will refresh automatically when you complete and sign each subsequent form. The page now shows that the document has been completed and your sample document has now been generated for the sample site. This covers completing and generating the sample. Next, we'll cover what happens with failures, retesting, and 100% testing. Let's start with failures. The tests won't always pass on the first time. Here's what will happen in the event of a failure. Completing and registering a failure is denoted by the document being highlighted in red. Failures will generate an adjacent document called the revision. This is where you will enter test data from your retest after corrections have been completed. You will need to complete and register the revision document in order to get your sample documents to generate. Once you register the passing revision form, your screen should look like this. Our revision 2 is now highlighted in green. However, because you registered a failure, that means you need to test a second site in the group before any samples will be generated. Once you complete and sign the document for the second site, your document will appear like this. As you can see, our original document registers the passing form with the samples generated. Our failed document shows the passing revision, and our second tested site shows the registered passing form and the subsequent samples have been generated. Now, let's look at what happens when you register more than one failure. In this example, our MEC27 has failed and has therefore generated the necessary additional revision version of the document. Again, you'll need to complete a passing test and submit the revision, which will make your screen look like this. As you can see, our revision is now marked green since it passes, but the samples have not generated, since a failure means that you'll need to perform a second test. If your second test fails, meaning there are now 2 failures within the group, you must test all documents of that document type. Even if you complete the retest on the second failure and it passes, samples still will not be generated. Once you have 2 failures in the group, you must test all of that document type. So, even with a passing test on our revision of the second document, the samples still do not generate because the 2 initial failures mean that now 100% of the sites must be tested. After the second failed test, sample documents will not generate for the third or any remaining sites. They must all be tested individually. To summarize, let's review one more time the 3 situations you might face as a rater when trying to use the Sample Groups tool. If your first test passes, your sample documents for the other sites are automatically generated. Our second scenario is that our initial test fails, which generates the revision of that test. Once the revision passes, we must then test the second site. When the second site passes, the rest of the samples for the remaining sites are then generated. Finally, our third scenario is that our first site fails. We retest it, and it passes. The second site fails, we retest it, and it passes. However, the third site and any remaining sites must then also be tested. The two failures means that a sample document will never be generated for the remaining sites, and 100% of the sites must be tested. These are our three primary workflows of how to complete the documents in a sample group. Let's cover one last feature before completing this training. From your list of sites, find the site with the most documents generated from the sampling. If all of your tests pass, this could be as early in your list as the second site. In the case of our sample here, this would be our third site, which has multiple documents generated from the samples that we demonstrated in this tutorial. Scroll back up to your list of sites at the top of the page. From there, click the arrow quick link to visit the site details page for that site. The site details page shows our sample documents, which will be labeled Sampled. When you download these documents, which you can do by hitting the PDF icon in the Document tab, you'll download the sampled version of this document. For documents that weren't sampled, such as the MEC 27 in this example, you'll be downloading the version with the test data present in the document. This concludes this tutorial.